Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. I hope you're having a fantastic day so far wherever you are in the world, and thank you so much for being here and joining me for another art video. In today's video, I'm going to be sharing a giraffe watercolor painting time-lapse that I worked on a couple of days ago, and I'm also going to be talking a little bit about what it is that I do to prepare before starting a watercolor painting. More specifically, I want to focus on what it is I do to plan and select the colors that I'm going to be using for the painting on hand. So in past videos, if you have seen any of my past videos on painting, you probably already know that I'm a huge believer in giving thought to the combination of colors prior to actually starting with the painting process. I really like personally keeping a limited color palette for my paintings, and I've really found that both of these things, both giving thought to color and testing colors out, as well as doing your best to keep a limited color palette, so something from 3, 5, maybe 6 colors, and use only those colors throughout your entire painting, is really going to help your painting look a lot more harmonious and cohesive at the end. Color is an incredibly important and essential element of art to know about in order to be able to create visually pleasing, harmonious looking compositions, and it's really not going to help you, and this is something that I personally did when I was first getting started with watercolor and other painting mediums as well. I thought that I could just go about the entire painting process randomly grabbing colors throughout the process, and then I ended up with muddy colors. I ended up with a painting that looked very amateurish and not cohesive, and as time went by and I continued practicing, I realized the importance of knowing the color wheel and also the importance of at least spending 5 to 10 minutes selecting the colors that you're going to be using for your paintings. I realized what a huge difference these two things make. So today I'm going to be briefly explaining how I personally go about selecting the colors that I'm going to be using for a painting. This isn't to say that this is the only way. It's really going to depend on your own painting style, how you want things to look at the end. And of course, if you already have a bit more time practicing your painting, then you probably already have come to a conclusion on which kind of specific colors you're drawn to more, which colors you like less, which color combinations kind of appeal to you, and all of these things are also definitely going to inform the color choices that you make. Just as an example, I would say that my own painting style is a bit more on the realistic side. I don't think it's hyper realistic. I definitely like things a bit more stylized in many ways. So my own painting palette usually goes very much hand in hand with how we actually see color in real life. I actually have a reference photograph in front of me, or something like an object or a subject actually in front of me in real life, and I pick my colors, I make my color selection based on what I'm actually seeing. However, as I mentioned before, I really love a certain amount of manipulation in terms of color, a certain amount of stylization, especially when it comes to things like saturation and contrast, because sometimes I really love pushing the envelope in these two ways. And of course, this is going to affect my color selection. This is only my case, but really, I believe that whatever kind of painting style you have, whether it's something very crazy, expressive, and abstract to something a lot more naturalistic looking, whatever kind of painting style and even whatever kind of painting medium you use, you're most likely going to be able to end up with something that's a lot more effective, harmonious, and cohesive if you make time to learn the color wheel, learn about color mixing and color schemes, so what colors go well together, and always make time to at least do a little bit of planning before starting a painting. Before I get into my explanation, I just want to take a very quick second to welcome all you new people just visiting my channel today for the very first time. I am super happy you found me, and do consider subscribing because every single Friday I share a new video with art tips, drawing and painting tutorials, and encouragement for aspiring artists. And if you do subscribe, don't forget to click on that little notification bell so that YouTube can let you know whenever I publish a new video. Alright you guys, let's get into the meat of today's video. So the very first thing that I did after having selected a high quality reference photo was I sat down with it and I took my time drawing and creating a freehand preliminary sketch until I arrived at something that looked good to me. It took me a while and I erased a lot because I had never drawn a giraffe in my entire life, and they have very strangely shaped heads and general proportions overall. But I really wanted to take this opportunity and practice my drawing because I haven't been drawing as much as I want to, and you guys know how important it is for me to continue with my sketching habit. But anyway, once I arrived at a good outline sketch that showed believable proportion and it was in the size that I wanted it when compared to my actual substrate that I was going to be using, I transferred it over to my piece of watercolor paper, which in this case I used Arches hot press 140-pound watercolor paper using a piece of tracing paper. Many times, especially when we're talking about a subject that I have drawn before, that I'm experienced with, I just go ahead and sketch right on my watercolor paper. However, this time, because I knew that I was going to be erasing a lot during my sketching process because I had never drawn a believable giraffe before, I did want to make sure to create my drawing separately just to make sure that I kept things as clean as possible and didn't damage my watercolor paper. Once my outline sketch had been transferred onto my sheet of watercolor paper, I taped it down onto my green cutting board or mat using regular masking tape. Usually, I am perfectly fine using regular masking tape to tape my watercolor paper down as long as it is over 140 pounds and I run the pieces of masking tape over my clothing before actually taping my paper down. This helps soften the adhesive on the tape, and also combining this technique with removing the tape at a 45-degree angle when you're done, and of course also making sure that your paper is 100% bone dry before removing it, is going to ensure that you don't damage your watercolor paper. Or at least I haven't had much of a problem myself. Alright, so once that's set, it's now time to go and grab my watercolor paintbrushes, a couple of pieces of scrap watercolor paper so that I'm able to test out my colors, as well as my paint set that I'm going to use for the painting on hand. I decided to go for my Winsor Cotman line pan set for this one because I know that it has a lot of different tans, brownish colors, neutral colors, as well as yellows that I can tell from looking at my reference photo I am going to need. And then while observing my reference photo, which I usually have open on my computer screen, I then make time to pick all of the possible colors that could come in handy for my painting. There's no need to go overboard with the amount. Remember, we're trying to keep things a little bit limited. And when I am using this particular paint set, because the pans are so easy to remove, I just go ahead and remove them for explanation's sake, but also because I'm trying to make things easier for myself during the painting process, because sometimes when I leave them in there, I mistakenly go into a color that I wasn't intending to use. Especially when we're talking about a bigger paint set like this one, in which many colors kind of look the same while on the pan. However, there are other times that I just take note of the name of the pigment, and I have the little list of colors written down on a piece of paper. So anyway, once I have pre-selected my colors, it is now time to test them out. Remember, many times when it comes to watercolors, the color looks one specific way while in the pan, but it may look completely different when you actually swatch it out. And this is why it's so important to actually take time to do this. So here I decided to get started with the yellows and oranges. This first one was yellow ochre, which is a color I use a lot. The second one is cadmium orange, I wanted to make sure to have a bright orange for this painting because I can definitely tell in the picture that there are some areas, especially on the hair along its back of its neck, that look a lot more orange, and other areas that look a lot more light tan or even golden or brown. The third yellow that I swatched out right there is called gamboge, and this is one of the colors that look extremely different while in the pan when compared to how they look on paper. You can see how in the pan that color looks like almost a yellow ochre or a raw sienna, but on the paper it looks like a very bright yellow. I am now moving on to swatching out some red colors, which I may or may not need depending on my color selection. The first red that I swatched out is called light red. The second red is my Indian red. And the third reddish brownish color that you can see right there is burnt sienna. Alright, so we are now moving on to deeper, darker browns. Not only am I able to perceive very dark browns in my reference picture, almost black, but I know that I'm also going to want to develop high levels of contrast in my piece, and I need to be able to create very dark values to contrast with my lightest values. And so this is why I take time swatching out a few different browns that I can make sure to have to darken values of other colors by mixing them together, as well as create those very dark browns that I'm able to perceive in some areas of the picture. Now, because I know that watercolor dries lighter than how it looks when it's wet, I'm gonna make sure to come back and notice these brown swatches especially, because I know that I have to create very dark browns, almost black browns. And so I know from past experience that I can add in blue, a dark blue, into my brown to create an even darker brown. And this is something that I have in mind as I start testing out my blues. Just for you to know, the three browns that you see right there swatched out are sepia, burnt umber, and Van Dyke brown. That's their order from left to right. So I wanted to make sure to test out some blues as well because I knew since the beginning that I wanted to create a wet on wet vignette like effect to simulate the sky background behind the giraffe. And I considered changing the background color to maybe a green so that it can like simulate a plant background or something like that. But then I considered the fact that yellows and oranges, which are colors that I was going to be using a lot for the giraffe, which is the main subject of my painting, really contrast and pop out from colors like blue and purple because they are complementary to each other in the color wheel, meaning they are opposite to each other in the color wheel. And this is just one of the many reasons why it's so useful to know about the color wheel. It helps us a ton not only during the painting process as we are mixing colors together, but also, as you just saw in this case, as you are planning the colors prior to starting with the painting process. Okay, so in terms of the blues that I picked out to test, the first one is indigo, that very dark blue that you see on the left. The one in the middle is Prussian blue, and the one on the far right is ultramarine. Now, as I mentioned before, I am not a huge fan of ultramarine blue, but I did want to bring it in just in case. I knew that I wanted to test out the transition between two different blues, a lighter blue and a darker blue, for my sky, for the wet on wet effect that I want for my sky. And that's why you see that little gradient that I created right there after having swatched out the three different blues. And I really like how the transition looked between indigo and Prussian blue, and that's what I decided to use for my sky. So after having done all of these swatches and tests, I have a good look at everything and I take my time selecting the colors that are going to stay and removing all of the colors that may be too similar to others or that I simply don't like as much as the other one, and just take them out from the mix. I ended up with 6 colors, and these are cadmium orange, burnt umber, Prussian blue, Van Dyke brown, yellow ochre, and indigo. And these are the pigments that I am going to be using to create all of my needed color mixtures throughout my entire painting process. If you have been painting for a while and you know kind of a couple of specific colors that you constantly reach for, I would love to know which they are in the comments section below. I just find it very interesting how each one of us is called not only towards different colors, but towards different combinations of colors. And it's so useful for us to start noticing these patterns in our work, because these are the kinds of things that help us get closer and closer to finding our artistic style. Alright you guys, so I think that that is it in terms of the chatty part of this video. I am now going to be leaving you to enjoy the rest of this painting time-lapse with some nice music. And I really hope that some of you guys out there just getting started on your own painting journeys found this helpful. If you have any questions at all, please make sure to leave them down in the comment section. Never hesitate to reach out to me. It may take me a few days to get back to you, but I read all of you guys' comments. Thank you guys so very much for your kindness and your support. It means the absolute world to me. Thank you so much for watching this video and visiting my channel today. I really appreciate it. I would absolutely love to connect with you over on different social media channels. My links will be down below in the description box. Don't forget to subscribe so I can see you next Friday, and stay inspired.